Thomas DeQuino, let's start with what you would like to see for your members, for corporate Canada, for the people you represent. What would be the biggest priority? What would you like to see on the agenda for the Obama visit?
Martin, the first thing we want to see is the two leaders establishing a very constructive and trustful relationship, because if that does not exist, then all the other things that I may suggest that should go on the agenda may fall by the wayside. I would say the number one concern is the dreadful economic circumstances that both the United States and Canada and other parts of the world find themselves in. And in this regard, Canada, particularly when we go to the heart of what one of the critical problems is, namely the health of our financial institutions, really stands out above virtually every other country in the world. Even Paul Volcker, who, as you know, was just appointed by President Obama to head up this Economic Advisory Board, said that we should be looking to Canada for some of the solutions that we should be seeking in the United States. So I think that that is a clear case where Canada has both a record and something that they can put on the table that President Obama would say, hey, Stephen Harper, how did you people do it in Canada? And maybe there are some things that we can learn. Secondly, and related to that, is the issue of ensuring that our financial institutions are made whole again. That remains, if you wish, the big lacuna in this debate, because now what we've got is virtual contamination throughout the industrial economy, not just in North America but around the world. And until we resolve the issue of the banks and the toxic assets, there will be no resolution. The governor of our Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, people at finance have got some very good ideas on how we should be pursuing that, so very high on the agenda. Second one is energy and the environment. We are the largest, as you know, foreign supplier of energy to the United States. The energy equation is crucial. Tied to it, the environmental agenda. President Obama has expressed an interest in a cap-and-trade system for North America. So has the Harper government. We've got a situation in both the U.S. and in Canada where we've got states and provinces all going off in different directions. There's a real need for cohesion. And I think that the President and the Prime Minister is saying, look, we will have a joint strategy that we will take to the world on climate change. And because energy is such a critical component of that, that offers an excellent opportunity for moving forward. The third one is security. And by security, I mean domestic and international. Internationally, it's important to the Americans that we are in Afghanistan, and we've been a serious player in Afghanistan, and I think that a continuation of where Canada and the United States can continue to work together in dealing with that particularly difficult problem will be helpful and will find interest in the United States. And finally, domestic security. How do we make our borders work better? There has been a thickening of the borders steadily. You've heard this, Martin. How do we move back from that? How do we get a new look on the part of Homeland Security to what we're doing?
I'm going to throw at you something that you've been speaking of, though, and I was kind of anticipating that as an answer, and that is protectionism in the United States. And you are experienced in international trade law. My question is, there was a lot of concern 2 weeks ago, somewhat less concern last week when the Senate, it's been described as watered down, the protectionist measures, the Buy American measures in the economic bailout or stimulus bill. They've added the phrase that this will not go against any of America's existing trade obligations. A question I asked my journalist last week, are we out of the woods, or is protectionism from the United States, south of the border, in legislation or whatever, is it still a concern? Are you still concerned by those measures?
Oh, very much so. You know, that language was very welcome, and it was seen by many people, not just in Canada but around the world, who are deeply concerned about this as, quote, a great victory. And one might argue that it was a victory in principle, that some wise senators understood and appreciated where the position of President Obama is on this, who clearly does not favor protectionism in the form of Buy America provisions. On the other hand, he is a Democrat. He has a huge constituency that supports him and expects that U.S. treaties will be interpreted to the advantage of the United States, i.e. fairly, as they would argue. And secondly, that where taxpayers' money is used to source materials that are going to be used for the spending of the so-called stimulus bill, that's going to go to American suppliers. And I don't think we're out of the woods yet, and I think what has been missed in part of the debate is that a large part of this expenditure will be at the state level, where the issue of obligations that may be tied to the stimulus bill may in fact not directly apply. So I think we have to be extremely vigilant. And I think the general strategy, not only on the part of Canada, but on the part of other countries around the world, is to say, all right, we've seen the words, now let's actually watch to see how it's implemented. And if in the implementation we begin to see that there is going to be protectionism applied, that's when we launch, if you wish, the next set of missiles. But I continue to be concerned, and very simply because it's not just the United States. There's a flowering of protectionist measures all around the world. We are documenting a lot of them, and I don't even claim to know what they all are, but I can tell you that what I'm seeing in Europe, what I'm seeing in Asia, what I'm seeing in South America, what I'm seeing in the United States is deeply, deeply troublesome. And I suggested in a speech last week that unless we come to terms with this issue, consistent with the spirit of the G20 meeting in Washington, remember, where the G20 leaders said we must resist protectionism, unless we really come to terms with that in a serious and honest way, I think that could be the thing that sinks us all.
But you've just expressed it, though, and there's a lot of concern that the Buy American measures, even although President Obama has said, I don't want to start a trade war, even although the senator involved has changed the wording and it will respect American obligations, you've just said it, that there's a question mark over states and municipalities. Precisely. When they get federal funds, when they get taxpayer funds, they can still buy American. They can still exclude. You're saying, let's wait and see. A lot of people would say, we've seen wait and see what happens when you get...
Well, Mark, I didn't say I'm in favor of wait and see, but I'm saying that is what I understand the position of this government and other governments to be. And that is victory so far. There will be sensitivity. Nobody wants to start a trade war. But I repeat, something you know very well from your long experience, all politics in the United States is local. And once these decisions, once the money starts to flow, and the shovels really begin to work in the ground, and products are sought, and supplies are sought, it'll be enormously surprising to me if we do not see emerge in all parts of the United States pressures and urgings that the supplies come from American suppliers only.
You've seen the experience. We're harking to the experience, for example, of softwood lumber.
Precisely.
It took years and years to try and get a partial victory, even although the president, the then president, was in favor.
Yeah. I would just say one last thing, though, that I do not underestimate the enormous power of this particular president at this particular time, greater than that of, and you know what the numbers are. So I think what I've called for is a very strong declaration by Stephen Harper and Barack Obama in Ottawa that say we two leaders resolutely oppose any form of protectionism. It's been demonstrated not to work in the past, and we know that it would be lethal to what it is that we're trying to achieve, just not only jointly as Canada and the United States, but what we're all trying to achieve here. And I think something that really highlights that coming out of Ottawa would be, in my view, a major victory for Canada. It would be a victory for the President of the United States as well.
Okay, last question.
Yes.
Auto sector.
Yes.
We are awaiting the finalization of the American bailout package for the Big Three or the Detroit Three. So far, GM and Chrysler Canada have not availed themselves of Canadian funds and Canadian arrangements. There's a big concern that come next week, we're going to start to see, there's a lot of worry, and tell me if it's shared by corporate Canada, that if Canadian GM and the Canadian Chrysler haven't signed on, that they won't be bound by any Canadian rules because they're not taking any Canadian money, and the fear is that they're going to start to shut down operations in Canada. They're going to take the American package, live up to American obligations, and forget about Canada.
Martin, I won't comment specifically on GM and Chrysler, except to say this. This concern that you've identified is out there. I mean, people are talking about it. And as a general principle, I've been of the view, and certainly shared by my colleagues right across Canada, that if you take an industry that is so heavily integrated, where our supply chains are in effect really so totally integrated, such as autos, and you try to come up with what I call just a U.S. solution, then I think it could be catastrophic for Canada. If what you mean by a U.S. solution is that the bailouts and every other form of constructive assistance that may be given to the auto sector is deemed to be only an American action, and it's oblivious to the highly integrated nature of the auto sector. In other words, it would be like saying we're going to help one side of a family but we really don't care that there's a husband and a son and a daughter and a grandchild involved. That's why I'm very nervous about any bailout package or any form of financial assistance that is targeted only to the U.S. side of any industry that is heavily integrated with that.
Well, I'll put you on the spot, though, to use the same analogy. If one side of the house is warm, is everyone in the family going to move to one side of the house?
Well, precisely. I mean,
is it going to happen?
I mean, that is a fear, and if wise people prevail and wise thinking prevails, both in the auto sector and in those who are purporting to help the auto sector, they will recognize that there can only be one solution. It has to be a North American solution. And if you don't have a North American solution, what you're really doing is shooting yourself in the foot. The name of the game here is global competitiveness. And you don't achieve global competitiveness by trying to resolve issues by saying we're only going to fix one part of the house. Canada is a major player.
Okay, Thomas Aquino, a pleasure as always. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much, Mark.
President Obama said that every time he talks to you, you bring up the Buy American provision in the stimulus bill. What do you tell him?
Well, I think obviously we have a general concern, as you know. One of the things that we absolutely must do in this recession is make sure that we don't start cutting trade and we don't start to see a rise in protectionism across the world. That is the biggest single risk, in my view, to the global economy long term. That was what made the Great Depression so great. Our new government has committed Canada to active and sustained re-engagement with the hemisphere to advance security, prosperity, and democracy. I visited the region this summer. The contrasts were stark and they are worrisome. While many nations are pursuing market reform and democratic development, others are falling back to economic nationalism and protectionism, to political populism and authoritarianism. There is a lot of worry in this country about the ideology of populism, nationalism, and protectionism in the Americas and the governments that promote it. But frankly, my friends, there is nowhere in the hemisphere that those forces can do more real damage than those forces in the United States itself.